Our last speaker is Kyle Voigt. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, nice job.
Let's
Nice.
go. Awesome. Great start. Kyle's the director of sports science at Austin Football Club. He has been the director since January 2024. Before that, he was an assistant for 2 years prior. And then before that, he was the sports science coordinator at USC. Um, he has his CSCS and his certified sports scientist through the NSCA also. Really excited to have Kyle to bring on that sports science approach as kind of round it all up as we've had the head coach, AT, strength coach. So it's great to have all those perspectives brought into this. So Kyle, take it away.
Yeah, Hayden, thank you so much for inviting me to speak, and thank you for hosting this. This is pretty awesome. It's cool to see Eric again. Eric was an intern at Austin FC before I got to Austin FC. Um, and ironically, the sports scientist Joe he's talking about with the first team at Philadelphia, he and I worked together before I was at USC at the University of Louisville. So it's a pretty small world, and it's pretty cool to see how things change and evolve. So I'm gonna share my screen real quick onto that PowerPoint. Nice. All right, and we'll play from the start. Fantastic, awesome. So this presentation is called High Performance Player Management. This is an Austin FC approach to it, right? So at the bottom, that's our Austin FC logo, and to the right, that's what we call our roots, and we'll get into that in a moment. See if I can go to the next slide. Nice.
Bringing the drums. That's how we do in the city in front. Turn up the lights, we going live. Told you we 7-9. Bass, the boy, the city is setting my pace. Got everything set in its place. Yeah, it's time to be great. Louder. This one here for my team, huh? Pulling up in that green, huh? Yes, not in our league, but not in our league. 5, 1, 2, better get this started up. I don't, maybe don't. I gotta get my targets up. If them like going green, FC we sparking up. They can't take that heat. Them boys not paid like us. It's more than a buzz when we turn on them lights. They yell at the crowd, make something ignite. From the city, they came in a fight. They came in a fight. ATX, we here for the fight.
So I thought that'd be fun to show at the start, right? That's a pregame video we show before every one of our home games. And I think it basically brings it back to like what we're about as a club from a business side and from our sporting operations side is we're here to inspire the city of Austin. That's ultimately the goal of sport in my mind, but also the goal of our club. One of the cool experiences I've had working for this team is my dad is a professor at USC where I did my undergrad, and one of his students now lives in Austin, and he's got a young son. They're Venezuelan, and I've been lucky enough to get them tickets to games, and just seeing like the experience that this young kid gets to have reminds me of growing up in LA and going to Galaxy games and even LAFC when I was in college, and just like feeling like what soccer can be in this country. So it's awesome to be a part of it. And I think this is a good starting point for us. So this is Q2 Stadium. This is where our first team plays its matches. This is what most people see from our club, whether that's on Apple TV or they're watching highlights on YouTube or they're there in person. Most people, they see what happens on this field or in different MLS stadiums, right? It's our goalkeeper playing against LA Galaxy there. He's basically claiming a cross on a corner. This is after a goal. And this is one of our players celebrating. If you notice, there's actually a catapult receiver on the top, and there's the guy talking right now over on the far right. So this is a lot of our staff actually on the screen right now after a goal. So it's cool to be a part of these types of things. So the purpose of this presentation today is going to be talking about like giving y'all a glimpse into a high performance department that we have at Austin FC and how it supports our people, whether that's our players or our staff. Because maybe what's a little bit different from where I was in college is in the professional level, our season starts February, like late February, and our last game could be in the beginning of December. So these are very, very long seasons, and we have to be able to support these people throughout this entire time period. So I showed Q2 Stadium, I showed these awesome pictures and this video of all that stuff going down. This is where the work happens. This is St. David's Performance Center. We have 2 practice pitches, and then we have our first team building on the right and our academy/next pro building, which is our second team on the left. Right. And this is where we go into training, right? This is where we put in our tactics. This is where we do our fitness. This is where we do everything it takes to prepare guys to play at the highest level in Q2 and stadiums like it. Right. And this is definitely part of it as well. Like, we love resisted accelerations. I personally really like the idea of loaded sleds. And this is a way of us transitioning. Hey, how can we take something that's typically resistance exercise done in a gym and put it in a slightly more transferable location, right? So we tend to do these on our endurance day, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then this is guys lifting, right? So in the middle, hex bar deadlift. We have some med ball throws on the right. And then we typically do force plate jump testing. We cycle through just a standard hands on hips counter movement jump, a squat jump, so pause at the bottom, and then concentric only up. And then we also do the 10-5 repeated hop test that Eric actually mentioned earlier. So we'll cycle through those tests to give us baseline metrics of these different guys each week. So we don't do all 3 tests, but once a month, we'd like to get each one of these tests on each guy to be able to understand, hey, total explosive power here, slow stretch shortening here, and then fast stretch shortening here. So ultimately, we believe that a high performance model within our cultural context best allows us to support the performance of our players, coaches, and staff, both in the short term and the long term. So the major keys of this presentation are going to be talking about our vision and our values. One of my favorite terms from anatomy, which is structure dictates function. So how things are structured typically leads to how they will function, and then everything in action. So here's our vision, these are our values, this is our structure, this is our function. How does this actually lead to outcomes through a high performance model? So as I showed in the title slide, these are our roots, right? So Austin FC's got a really cool logo. We've got these branches that branch up, and we have these roots that dig deep into the ground, right? So our minister of culture / owner, one of our owners, is Matthew McConaughey, right? Matthew McConaughey talks within our context of the 100-Year War and building a legend. So that's what we're about. We're about how can we set a foundation in these roots to ultimately build an organization that inspires a city. So our 4 roots are growth mindset, hard work, resiliency, and collective. And I'll go through what we actually mean by those things here. So growth mindset to us is being willing to learn and commit to an action. So MLS, as opposed to a lot of soccer leagues in the world, is a salary capped league, basically meaning there are certain roster mechanisms that allow you to get higher end players, talking Miami with Lionel Messi, or even us with a guy like Sebastian Driussi. But most teams in the league have salary budgets very, very similar to their competition, which is by design. We want a sports league in this country, like other sports leagues like the NBA and the NFL, where any team can beat any team in any given game, because the players are typically, like, the team strengths are typically around each other. So this on the left is one of our players. Actually, he got subbed in at halftime of a game, and then 8 minutes later came out with a hamstring injury. And this is him being supported by our goalkeeper, but also this is a growth mindset moment for him, right? He's going to have to rehab this injury and then try to come back better. Hard work, that's demonstrating an effort and engagement in what we're about. Hard work to us is a non-negotiable. That's something that you bring every single day. And if you do not bring that hard work, it'll be very hard for you to be in our environment for a long term. And then collective, which is arguably one of our most important. We talk about collective on a daily basis at our club. It's about the team being bigger than self and consistently taking actions for the betterment of the team. And to be honest, this is a challenge. Being a collective in MLS is a challenge because you have guys who are making $2, $3, $4 million, and then you have guys who are also making $85,000, $90,000, right? We're talking very large ranges in salaries, which can lead to some egos and some issues. Now, collective for us becomes really, really important because, like I said before, a lot of teams have salary points that are around the same. So we have to be a better unit than the unit we're playing. And the last one's resiliency. I thought this was a funny picture. This is actually this year during the yo-yo intermittent recovery test level 2. We do that coming into every preseason for our first team and second team. This is at the beginning on the top and then at the end on the bottom. So really challenging test. On that day, it was actually about 31 degrees Fahrenheit, which is fairly cold for me being from LA. But even in Austin, that's pretty cold. So resiliency to us is choosing toughness and choosing to persevere when things get challenging. So those are our core values. So cool, I've gone through the club's core values. Let's talk about our high performance model. So that building in the middle, that's our gym and predominantly where this model takes place. So our structure dictates our function, right? So these are the different groups within our sporting organization, right? So you have the sporting director at the top, people in charge of player personnel, first team, second team, academy players, operations staffs, coaching staffs. And then on the right, we have our high performance department on the left. When I say high performance department, I typically mean our first team and second team, our professional levels. And then we actually have an academy high performance department as well. They technically fit within our department. However, because of the timing of a lot of the trainings, they typically operate more in the evenings and afternoons, whereas we typically train and are working in the morning with the first and second teams. So these are the positions within our actual high performance department. So for us, we have high performance director at the top, and to the left, those are more of our performance related people. And to the right, those are more of our medical related people. So we've got a head performance coach. We have a director of sports science, academy high performance director with 2 assistants. We also have a manager of data and analytics, a part-time dietitian, next pro, like performance coach / sports scientist, as well as director of medical on the right, head athletic trainer, a physical therapist, 2 assistant athletic trainers, and then 2 academy athletic trainers. So this is actually the schematic of our building. When a player gets in, at least a first team player gets into our facility, there's a parking lot reserved for players and coaches where it says hydrotherapy room, like above it where the actual font is. So they'll park their car, they'll walk around to the player entrance to the left, they'll walk in, and immediately to the left is their first team locker room. So they can walk in there and have their own space. So what's unique about this setup is there is no way for the players to basically go from their entrance to either food or coaching staff without going through the training room. And I think that's a really good design of a building, because that means that as a high performance department, we are the first touch point the athlete has outside the kit mat. So it allows us to have that initial touch point, allows us to greet them, but also allows us to get a good understanding of where they're at before they have to be quote unquote on. And then as you can see down the bottom, that's our high performance office. So I think what makes that relatively unique is we have medical and performance staff all in the same office. So we have a performance table down the bottom and we have a medical table up the top. And that basically allows us to have these really interesting discussions within one room. And it really helps break up a siloed approach. because we don't have to go anywhere to have these conversations. We're all in the same room. So our Austin FC high performance values, very similar to our roots, but the biggest additions are going to be humility and vulnerability and curiosity. So being humble and being vulnerable are really important in our space. The biggest reason I say that is because those two things are the bedrock for collaboration. Having a humble mindset, coming in and not thinking you have the answer and you know best is a key core requisite of what we do. Also, you have to be willing to be vulnerable in our space. You have to be willing to put your ideas out there and be okay if they're not accepted, or be okay if they're not the thing that we end up doing. I'll be the first person to tell you, I got a lot of ideas and I have a lot of curiosity, and I try to push different things and try different things, and I get shot down all the time. But that's part of being part of a team, is you try to push things forward however you think is best, but you have filters of other people around you coming from different backgrounds that can ultimately help you. So those are our 6 core values: humility, hard work, collaboration, curiosity, stress resilience, and vulnerability. So I showed positions before. These are the actual people in those roles, right? So Dave Tenney is our high performance director, and he has quite a few people directly underneath him. Ryan Tam is our head performance coach. I'm the director of sports science. Hayden Van Brew is our director of data and analytics. Brett Singer is our dietitian. Adrian Jaimez is our high performance intern. I'm not going to read through all of them, but as a legend, I guess, first team staff members are in light blue. Academy staff members are in green, and Next Pro / second team staff members are in orange. People that are on the performance side have a yellow circle, and people on the medical side have an orange circle, right? So hopefully that gives you a better picture of like what our actual department looks like. So I think the number one major contributor to our high performance culture is overlapping skill sets. I think overlapping skill sets is such an important piece of us doing what we do. So here's an example with the first team, right? I've got a Venn diagram of 4 circles. So we have soccer specific at the top, medical on the right, strength and conditioning / performance on the bottom, and then data science on the left side, right? So Dave, as the high performance director, I think has done a really good job of hiring people who are multifaceted and are more generalists in nature, right? A good example, from a data science standpoint, Hayden Van Brewer is our manager of data analytics. So he's the one in charge of managing our cloud-based database. He actually is the one who built our front-end website. He sends out reports to coaches and different staff members. But he also played Division III soccer, has been a soccer coach before he got into analytics, and he really, really understands the game. He talks with our coaches about different strategies and stuff like that. So he has that mixture of a role. Whereas myself, I didn't come from a soccer background, right? My previous job, predominantly, I was working with a college football team. But my background is more in the strength and conditioning side, where I actually spent a lot of time in the gym, but also from a data science perspective. So when it comes to our data engineering, I actually have a really heavy hand in that. I'll actually build out a lot of our API connectors with our different tech vendors, but even our soccer specific data, like StatsBomb or our data we get from the league. I'll be the one who actually orchestrates the APIs and then puts them into the cloud where they run automatically. So that's kind of where this overlap takes place. And then you have guys like Ryan and Satoshi, who have a soccer specific skill set, but also come into it with either a medical background or a strength and conditioning background. So they can work with guys with the ball to be able to actually get them to where they need to go. And then Dave's in the middle. Dave has got a hand in pretty much everything, which I think makes him a really unique person to be in a role of high performance director. So major contributor number 2 are these roles between teams. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So 3 circles this time. first team, next pro / second team, and then academy on the right, right? So we do have staff members who predominantly work with one team. So first team, you have 3 that just work with the first team. Academy, we have 4 that just work with academy. Next pro, we only have 1 staff member who just works with next pro. But then the 3 director level people, Dave, Mauricio Elizondo, and myself, we actually have supervisory roles all the way through the teams. So Dave is obviously in charge of our entire high performance department. Mauricio is in charge of athletic trainers and medical from first team all the way through academy. And then myself, I'm basically in charge of all technology used at the club from a sports science perspective. So that's the GPS that the academy is using, next pro and first team, as well as force plates, groin bar, Nord board, Omega Wave, First Beat. We've got a lot of different tech here, 1080 that I'm really excited that we have, but also it's a lot to manage. But what it allows us to do is we've done a lot of work of pulling all of the data for all teams into one coherent database so that it's a one-stop shop. So I remember Eric mentioning, like, how do you manage, or he got asked the question, how do you manage that first team to next pro transition? It's a lot easier for us because our next pro performance coach, his desk is in our first team office. So he and I talk every morning. Hey, who's going to be with you? Who's going to be with me? Hey, what did he do the day before? All that data is going into one spot. So we're able to manage loads across teams fairly easily. So that's theoretical. I said a lot of stuff. Let's put this into action. Let's go through some actual scenarios of high performance taking place. So 3 scenarios. First, we'll talk about tactical periodization. Second, we'll talk about player pathways. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about return to play. So tactical periodization is a fun word. It's a fun phrase, right? So I remember Eric might actually get a kick out of this one. I was talking to Joe Trocchio when I was at USC working with football, and I really wanted to get into soccer. I really wanted to be involved in soccer. And Joe was like, man, you really got to learn about tactical periodization. You really got to learn about tactical periodization. I'm like, what is this tactical periodization thing? So I looked some stuff up and learned about Vitor Fraud, and basically, oh, this Portuguese guy came up with it. Jose Mourinho started using it. Oh, okay. So Jose used it and had a lot of success. People wanted to know about his success. And he talked about tactical periodization. So we'll talk a little bit about it. So they talk about morphocycles, which is basically like a weekly microcycle type thing, right? So starts with the match day plus minus system all the way through to the next match, right? So typically it's broken into, you have a game, you've got rest, you've got an active recovery / reintro day, you have a quote unquote strength day, endurance day. Some teams will take a rest day, or they'll do their speed day, or they'll flip the -2 and the -1, and then they'll have another game, right? And what's interesting is this actually directly relates to a lot of our routes, right? So the routes are what's shown within the match, but we need a growth mindset coming into +2 because it's the first day back after a game. We're trying to learn about what happened in the game and how we can improve. Strength day is all about being resilient. Endurance is all about hard work. And then the next 2 days is all about bringing us all together. And I'll go into a little bit more about like what each of these days are and what they mean to us. Because I think people that are listening to this who have somewhat of an understanding of tactical periodization may think that we do it a little bit different, which I think is pretty awesome, to be honest. So this is maybe a challenging visual, but this actually shows the work intensity of the different groups within our team, right? So I have our coaches, our performance staff, players, medical staff, and then analysis. So analysis to me is like the video staff, Hayden with analytics, and even myself in terms of like turning around data and making sure the right people have it. So from a coach's standpoint, they typically take the day off immediately after the game to try to just like separate themselves from whatever the result is. And then their biggest days are going to be the reintro day. So like the first day back in the office, and then that tactical day, because they're preparing for the next team, right? So that's their weekly flow. From a performance standpoint, The biggest days typically are the reintro day, the endurance day, and the match day prep day. We typically do an upper body lift on the reintro day, so first day back, and then we'll do our lower body day on our biggest on-field day to try to just like sandwich the stimuli together so that we can take a lower day on the tactical day. From a player standpoint, their hardest days are the -3 and the game. We try to have a decent number of low days within their schedule just because we have a really long season and we really don't want to beat up our guys too much. From a medical standpoint, their biggest days are, hey, right after, just in case there's a major injury that takes place, the reintro day where they're checking in on every single person, the tactical day, because we've just had 2 hard days of training, that's strength and endurance day, and then the match day itself. They do a ton of work preparing the guys for training, or not for training, for an actual game. And then from an analysis perspective, our biggest days are in the beginning of the week. So for me, right after the game, I'm making reports, I'm sending out information, we're helping plan stuff. The reintro day, we're doing Omega Wave in the morning to check on readiness of high minute players. We're still talking about the game, we're looking at the stats, hey, how do we improve on these different things? And then it gets a little bit easier as the week goes on because our work is done. We've given the information to who needs it. And then we are available to work on more longer term projects. So a match day for us is actually separated into 2 groups. So we have our reserves and then we have our playing squad. So reserves isn't necessarily guys who didn't make the team. It could be guys who are hurt. It could be, for example, the FIFA window for transfers just opened today. So we have 2 players who've been with us, but haven't been eligible to play. So now they're officially eligible, but they did a training with us yesterday. And then if you look in the middle on the reserves, that's actually just like us doing some testing with guys. So typically with those reserve training sessions, we'll do an on-field session. I'll try to bake in some type of testing with them just to give them some feedback. This one, he's actually doing a sprint, like a 10-meter sprint with a 1080. And then we filmed it from the side with something called view motion, which gives us some really interesting kinematics based off the sprint. And with the 1080, we get the kinetics. So we get a really interesting view into how this guy does his 10-meter sprint. And then we typically do a lower body lift after that. And then the playing squad, they're out there getting off the bus, going and playing in the game, and then trying to do what we need to do in order to win the game. So what I think is interesting from a high performance standpoint is we have staff that travel on the right, and we have reserve training staff. So I don't travel anymore. I traveled for the last 2 years. But myself and Adrian, a high performance intern, will run an on-field session, a gym session with the guys. And then from a medical standpoint, Neil, Bianca, and Dan will actually be there to help treat guys if they need to be treated and stuff like that. And then from a travel standpoint, Dave, Ryan, Mauricio, Joe, and Satoshi will actually be the ones who are managing that. And we're in pretty good communication about what the reserve guys did, what's going on with the travel group throughout the travel period. So match day +1 is our rest day. So typically I'll be texting guys about different things and the medical staff will be texting players, but that's their day to do what the players need to do. So our reintro day is our next day. So high minute players, they'll come in, they'll check with the medical staff. They'll do Omega Wave with me, which is basically just a readiness tool. You put electrode on the base of the hand and the forehead, and then a heart rate strap on. And from there, it gives us a good understanding of cardiac-based measures, so HRV, different things like that. But we can also get like a good central nervous system readiness score from DC potential coming from the brain, right? So from that, we can basically understand like, hey, is this person able to relax? And then how is their heart functioning? We've been looking a little bit more into that lately in terms of the different frequency waves. And I've noticed that guys who have higher high frequency waves tend to be better at adapting to stress over time. People that start having lower high frequency waves during that testing, I've noticed they don't come back from high intensity work like games as quickly. And then typically after that, they'll go into a regen type session where they'll do some bike in the gym, some stretching, but then they'll also go outside, do a little passing pattern and some rondo. Low minute guys, they'll actually come in and they'll do activation work in the gym, and then they'll go do a training session outside. So this is our Omega Wave results on the left that are built into our club platform via our website. And then on the right, that's our low minute players, GPS and heart rate data. I know that's a little bit small to see. And if someone has any questions about what metrics we look at, we can definitely talk about that. But for now, I'll kind of just gloss over that. Match day -4 is our strength day. So what's a little bit different for us about a strength day is, yes, we do use smaller spaces. Yes, we do have less field players typically within the drills. But strength days to us are a lot less about, oh, we're trying to get high accelerations, high decelerations, lots of cutting, changing directions, stuff like that. For us, it's about allowing the guys to compete. It's allowing the guys to express the emotions that they have and allow them to do something with intensity in order to just get out the feelings from the last game, but also just like have fun. Because ultimately, these guys just want to play soccer. Like, they don't want to lift weights. They don't want to do treatment. They don't want to watch film. These guys want to play soccer. So we typically make a training session where these guys just get to compete all the time. And we've noticed it tends to be a really good positive for them because the players have an outlet to be able to express themselves. So there's not a lot of coaching done on this day. So our endurance day, that's our biggest session of the week. Those are big spaces, full numbers. We'll typically try to play 11v11. That's a heavy emphasis on tactics. And then our big metric for that particular day is high intensity distance. So I'll have GPS set up live to basically monitor how much high speed running our players are getting. Specifically, I look at our wide players. Notice that fullbacks and wingers tend to be the ones who get overloaded the most within these types of sessions, because we have such a big emphasis on breaking the last line and running behind the line in order to basically just get behind the opposition and try to score goals. We also do resisted accelerations on this day. A lot of teams typically on this type of day will try to get a max sprint exposure. With our team, we actually have the 3rd or 4th oldest team in MLS. So for us, player availability and keeping guys available to play is massive. So we have basically gone the other way and said, hey, how can I load this shorter space like more heavily to resist, to place resistance on them so that they get a lot of force during the acceleration without getting to these high velocities and these big upright postures that could potentially put more stress on them. So we view this as a really good primer going into these bigger space activities. So match day -2 is something one of our players has called a spa day, which is basically like don't do anything, or a tactical day. So if it ends up being a spa day, we just won't even go outside. Guys will come in, we'll watch video, we'll do a regen in the gym, and then we'll make sure they get 2 meals and send them home. They've had 2 really big days of work. The idea is how can we recover them as much as we can? And a lot of what this day turns into is how hard were the previous 2 training sessions. So being adaptable to where the guys are at coming into the game. If we do the tactical session, that tends to be a fairly light session, maybe 35, 40 minutes long. And it's just making sure that we've solidified some tactical concepts. So match day -1 is a match day preparation day, and that's just tightening up loose ends, maybe 45 minutes to an hour type session. And it's fairly standard. We pretty much do the same thing every match day -1. So that's tactical periodization and how our team kind of works within tactical periodization to ultimately drive that. So from a player pathway standpoint, I mentioned earlier, we have different roles that work within the teams, And we're trying to get kids from our academy all the way up through our first team. So a big problem in youth soccer, especially in competitive youth soccer, is this relative age effect, right? The idea that kids who are born earlier in the year, based off these age stratifications, they tend to be picked over the kids who are born later in the year. So if you're a kid who's born between January and March, you tend to be picked more over at 13 years old, more than a player who is born in November, right? Because you've technically had 8 to 9 months of development over the younger guy. So what ends up happening, though, is these kids get picked for their physical development and abilities at 13, 14, 15. But then by the time they're 18, 19, everyone's on the same playing field. So we've noticed that, right? So we've collected this data. So before 2024, we were taking most academies in MLS and around the world are doing this. They're using a stadiometer to actually put the which basically measure height for guys, and we'll do that in centimeters. But we also noticed from just looking at their birthdays that 76% of our academy players who have done this type of measurement were born between January and June, or technically July, I guess. That's all front loaded towards the beginning of the year, right? We are selecting, our biases leading us to pick kids that are older than the younger kids, even though we know at the highest level of soccer as an adult, it's actually pretty even across all 4 birth quarters. So the solution for this from a high performance perspective is overlapping skill sets, right? So this was brought up from a medical perspective. Scott Waller, who's our academy athletic trainer, was like, hey, like I'm noticing a lot of injuries with guys who are going through their peak height velocity, but also I'm noticing that like so many of our kids are born earlier in the year. So he took the lead on the project. He compiled some research, and then he reached out to a sports scientist who's actually at Seattle Sounders now, who was at PSV, and then he put into a document all of this growth and maturation data. So he wanted to put this into practice. He goes over to Hayden Van Brewer, and Hayden's like, okay, yeah, man, like I've got a cloud-based database. We'll build you a form that you can input all this data in. I'll have a data structure set up, and then I'll build you visualization. So once you put this data in, you can get something back. Now, there's a bit of a gap typically between medical and then the data side, and that's where I fit in, right? I can help Hayden basically create the formulas and understand the code structure that he's going for in order to make sure that that works properly. But I can also understand what Scott's saying from the medical side and basically say, hey, how can we formalize this? How can we make this something that we do more often and in a repeatable way? And then Mike Mahoney from the performance side in the academy is actually the one who's collecting the data and implementing it using the forms and using these standardized measurement protocols. So we're taking these fields of data analytics, sports science, medical, and performance, and we're all coming together to use our skill sets to hopefully like measure this information better and provide that information to people who bring in players, so that not all of our players are coming to the team born between January and March, but also so that we can understand the biological maturity of these guys coming in, so that we're not always selecting the most mature people. So here's 2 different reports that come out of our database. So on the top left, this is actually like a growth and maturation report. So we have the date that the measurement was taken of their height and their weight. We have their predicted adult height in there based off their parents' reported heights, and then where they are at in terms of their peak height velocity. And then on the bottom right, we actually have like an individual physical profile. So what's their current height? What's their current weight? What are their different metrics from a 1080 30-meter sprint? What's their CMJ metrics on the force plate? And then right now we're using force frame squeeze and push in order to better understand lower body isometric strength. Still looking for different ways of getting a good lower body strength measure without there being too much risk or too much teaching having to take place. And the last one, and I'll kind of be short about this one, is return to play. So unfortunately, people get hurt in a high level sport, right? And as much as we don't want that to take place, like it is a reality that we work in. So this particular slide basically shows a typical injury and then the stages one of our players will go through. Obviously, there's longer term, there's shorter term injuries, but for the most part, they go through this progression. So player gets hurt, there's acute care, they return to the gym, they return to run, then they do individual sessions, then they'll return to the warm up with the team, then they'll return to training with the team, and then they'll return to actual being available to be picked for games. So based off these gradients and the color, you can see where the influence is for the different groups. So from a medical standpoint, they're pretty heavily involved throughout, but once the guys kind of return to the warm-up, they're a little more hands-off. From a performance perspective and even from a sports science perspective, once the guy is hurt, we can't really do much within our particular skill set. But once they return to the gym, once they return to run, then we get a little bit more involved. So I'll have them start wearing GPS when they start returning to run. I'll have them start doing 10-meter accelerations, and we'll look at left versus right imbalances, but we'll also like visually look at it and go like, okay, how's that looking? And then when they return to individual, that's taken by a performance coach who will basically run a soccer specific session as well as some general stuff in there to just make sure that, hey, we're checking these boxes so that we can return them to the warm-up. And throughout this, different monitoring pieces are embedded. And if someone has a question about those, happy to share it. But this return to run, return to individual, return to warm-up, that's a big gray area for high performance. That tends to be an area that can be a bit of a hiccup. I've seen situations where the medical wants to take them the entire length. The medical wants to be the person who's clearing every step of the way here. I've also seen it where performance basically takes the person once they return to the gym, and the medical is basically just there to like do treatment. You know, that's not what we want. We want an environment where everyone's got a little bit of involvement. Some people take a bigger emphasis at certain times than others, but we're all involved in this process because we all have a hand in it, right? And hopefully what this leads to is us winning games, right? That's our goal at the end of the day is, as a high performance department, how can we help these players and coaches win games, right? So if this was too long and you fell asleep or didn't read it, I talked about the values that drive Austin FC, right? Our hard work, collective, resiliency, and our growth mindset. I also talked about what our structures look like and how that dictates how we function as a high performance department. And then I gave examples of high performance and how we implement this model within our team. So lastly, our club, Austin FC, exists to inspire. Our high performance department aspires to help grow this inspiration. And we believe this high performance model allows us to be at our best to help support that aspiration. And I think it's a callback to the beginning. It's remembering what we do this for. I think if the people on this call are involved in soccer in some perspective, they watch soccer growing up or they experience the beautiful game as a player, and they know what joy it can bring and the emotions it drives. And ultimately, like that's what we're all here for. That's why we do it, is because we want to be part of something special and we want to create these memories for not only the people in the stadium, but for ourselves and for those that we serve. So thank you, and Dale ATX. That's my email. If anyone wants to shoot me an email with other questions we don't get to here, but thank you all for your time. I really appreciate you listening to me chat at you for a little bit.
Oh, that was awesome. I have a first question for you. If we're looking at like the college setting, our game schedule isn't as luxurious as the pro setting. So our games are typically Thursday, Sunday. if you're looking at, setting up, your endurance days, strength days, and things like that. How do you think, I mean, just you'd have to kind of go off the top of your head, but how would you
Yeah.
go about setting those up? If you're typically looking at it, Thursdays are game, Sundays are game. We typically use Monday as an off day. And
Yeah.
I would say Monday would be the start of your week.
Yeah. So if you play Thursday, Sunday, uh, we were actually ironically in a week very similar to that right now. So we played on Saturday, we played Wednesday, so yesterday, and then we have another game Saturday, right? So we have 3 games in 8 days. So in our particular schedule, first things first, the game is the game, and the game is the highest load. So don't do anything to mess with the game. So it's the challenge in the college perspective is you have those 2 game weeks over and over and over again, which are technically 3 game weeks, Sunday, Thursday, Sunday. So the main training day that you typically will get is going to be that Tuesday. And the challenge with that Tuesday is they've just come off of a day off. So if I'm in the college space, the biggest thing I have to understand is, does my coach sub? If my coach is like, hey, I really like these 13 players and I'm going to play these 13 players as much as I can, you have to treat them very different than the rest of the squad because they're the ones getting all of the loading and they're getting a ton of game minutes in. So you can't really train them all that much. But also, like if you have a team that subs a lot, you can probably design some trainings based off of the amount of work that you're seeing coming out of those games. If you have, I don't know, you have 18 to 19 players actually playing in a game, you might be able to actually, what's it called? Divvy up the load a little bit more and train a little bit more intensely. But it's hard. It's hard without understanding the entire context, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely tough.
Yeah.
It's a wild thing to navigate. Um, but I'm always just curious to hear, somebody at that pro level, what their thoughts are. Especially, when you do have the ability, sometimes you guys have, one game a week, just kind of how they would go about, setting that up. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have another question here for you. What is your day-to-day communication with the technical staff? And then how do you update the staff with performance updates throughout the season?
So a little bit different than my previous role. A lot of this communication I funnel up through Dave. So I basically will hopefully let me start over on that one. We have training. The guys finish lifting. Everyone's done medical treatments. We all get in a room each day. Our medical performance staff, our whole high performance staff, and we talk through each player. We'll literally go through each individual player and be like, okay, from a medical perspective, what do we see from him? Okay, performance perspective, what do we see from him? This. And then we'll basically look at GPS data from the training and go, okay, hey, it was really hot today. Heart rates are really, really high based off of these GPS numbers. Is that what we wanted on this particular day? And then my boss, Dave, will basically talk to the coaching staff. And I think Dave is really well situated for it because Dave has been, I mean, Dave brought GPS to North America. So he understands how this stuff works. He did that with the Sounders. And he's also got coaching licenses and has been a soccer coach. So he kind of understands like what they're getting at. So my direct day-to-day conversation with our technical staff is not super high. It's mostly through driving conversations with Dave and the medical staff. Hopefully that answers the question.
Awesome. I believe that is all the questions right now, but you have Kyle's email. So, like you said, shoot him an email, if you have any questions that pop up. Again, Kyle, like I've said with all the presenters, thank you again for taking the time out of your busy day and schedule to present. We really appreciate it. And it certainly doesn't go unnoticed. I still remember the time that Hayden and I first talked to you at the Sporting KC conference. I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago now. So again, great to see you at Austin FC doing great things. So thank you to our attendees for signing up for this. Fit will be in contact with you about some of the webinars. And then lastly, thank you again to Fit for putting this on. And then to the other co-host, Hayden. If I didn't say this before, he's the soccer performance coach at Nebraska, for taking the time to help organize these speakers. I hope you enjoyed this, and yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your day.